I think we need to turn on. Yeah.
Hello everyone. Today we're here for the last lecture series of CTP. I'm Tasmia Main, and I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. David Robinson Morris. To introduce him, I would like to inform you guys that he is an alumnus of CTP, and we're very proud to have him here today. He is the founder of Reimagine Illusion, if I'm pronouncing it right, LLC, a strategic consulting firm working at the intersection of imagination, policy, practice, and prophetic hope to radically imagine diversity and equity. He has also served as the inaugural executive director of the Institute for Black Intellectual and Cultural Life at Dartmouth College. Today he will be talking about contemplative practices and acts of resistance in higher education. Thank you. Please, let's welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. It's great to be back home at LSU. Thank you to the Curriculum Theory Project, to Molly, and to all of the organizers for having me. I share with Molly, I haven't been back to LSU, even though I live in New Orleans, for 10 years. We can talk about that later. But it's good to be here and be back home. Even though my studies particularly centered in higher ed, right, it was in the Curriculum Theory Project where I found my home and where I found my friends, and there's a group of us, Paul Eden, Shofei Hahn, and Maria Wallace. We meet every Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. on Zoom, and we have for the past couple of years. We write together, we talk together, we sort of counsel each other. I go offline when people start crying, which is not very contemplative of me. But it is where I found my place of belonging, right? In this behemoth of a thing we call LSU. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to help, if I can, anyone who is a part of the Curriculum Theory Project. See if that's gonna work for me. Now, I run a small firm called the Reimagine Illusion. I've done lots of things. I won't bore you with all those things, but the Reimagine Illusion really is around provoking possibilities, right? Re-engaging the imagination to provoke new possibilities. The first thing to go in any oppressive system is the imagination. So it's the first thing we have to get back if we are to think, be, do, work our way out of the current messes we now find ourselves in, right? So most folks, I'll go into an organization, they've hired me to come in, maybe not now, but they've hired me to come in for DEI work, for diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and they leave with a new sense of who they could be, right? And a plan to get there, to that new vision. That's the work that I do. I try to do. I want to go over some community agreements, now that I have to with this group, right? But I like to do it. I like to be clear about the expectations and have us all agree. One, that the key, engagement is the key to learning. I had the privilege of learning from Petra Hendry, who would always say that study like prayer is an ethic, right? It's a practice, it's a way of being in the world. So engagement with text, with life is the key to learning. The others I'll lift up for you is that, of course, in this space, we respect the dignity and the personhood of each individual, of each human being. The next one is really important, especially for the work that I do with groups. We dialogue so that we understand, right? Understanding, the Buddhists tell us, Thich Nhat Hanh tells us, is love by another name. And so we're here to practice love with one another. The next is we practice conversational justice. What does that mean? That means that you do not do what often happens at conferences when someone will stand up and say, I have a question, and they go on for 10 minutes without ever having a question, right? And you have a 15-minute Q&A period. So it's saying what you need to say, how you need to say it, and allowing the space and room for other people to say what they need to say. That's conversational justice. And finally, I just want you to be open to the possibility of a new. There'll also be lots of questions. I'll throw lots of questions at you. I do not believe in conclusions. There are always new plateaus. I don't know if there are any Deleuze and Guattari fans in here, but Deleuze and Guattari, two French continental philosophers, really kind of crazy guys. There's never a conclusion. There's always a new middle, right? And so that's where I'll leave you, at a new middle. Can we agree to that? Beautiful. I want you to take a deep breath. Take the deepest breath you've taken all day. Follow that breath. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. You are here. Breathe in. Breathe out. You are here. One more deep breath. I'm going to use this word a lot, contemplative practice. And so I want to define it before we move in, at least what I mean by contemplative practice, right? Some of the talk will also define it. But for me, contemplative practices are nothing more than the ways in which we come home to ourselves, right? How we quiet the mind, how we settle back into our bodies, how we remember ourselves back to the creative force, and how we transmute our suffering into love for ourselves and others. Right? So contemplative practice in a nutshell are the ways in which we come back home to ourselves. Contemplative practice is a method, and we'll talk about this. Right? I'm here today to talk about a new volume. So myself, along with two editors, have just published at the end of last year a new volume of work by the same title as the lecture. Dr. Michelle Chapman and Lee Ray Costa. Michelle is at University District of Columbia and Lee Ray is at Hollins. The volume contains 34 contributors. There are 4 parts, 26 chapters, and over 20 practices. Each chapter contains a contemplative practice created by the author. This is over 3 years worth of work and lots of editing and lots of back and forth with the contributors. But I think what we've offered is needed at this time, right? It just so happened, nothing just so happens, kismet, that the book came out at the end of last year, when it felt like all hell was breaking loose in higher education, right? So hopefully you'll pick it up, but we're going to talk about what it contains. So the introductory chapter of the book contains these words: the contemporary context of institutions of higher education has illuminated the oppressive nature, unhealthy work practices, and stresses of higher education institutions that were intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic, and every system's unpreparedness to deal with the multiple crises that remain present even today. For example, as we wrote in April of 2024, university administrators and governing bodies across the country were responding to peaceful student protests, solidarity rallies, and the exercise of First Amendment rights with aggression, with violence, with militarization, and even threats to call in the National Guard. Faculty and staff, along with students, at that point had been arrested and seriously injured at the hands of police. Simultaneously, higher education and academic freedom are under attack by conservative politicians who have passed or introduced anti-DEI legislation at that point in 30 states, resulting in the elimination of entire units on college campuses and the reversal of decades of progress on equity and inclusion. We've also seen university presidents, the majority of them women and women of color, interrogated in congressional hearings, not unlike the political theater of the McCarthy era, resulting in the loss of their leadership positions and declining public belief in the value of higher education. These events come on the heels of the supposed racial reckoning of 2020. After the murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement, which forced an examination of every American institution and materialized indictments of racism, widespread inequity, and unbridled oppression, the bedrock, some might say, of our American democracy. Let us say this in a different way. The country's racial reckoning, coupled with COVID-19, brought to the forefront higher education's systemic legacies of white supremacy, including the physical, emotional, and spiritual violence against people of color and marginalized persons within educational spaces. Not that working in the academy wasn't difficult before 2020, but the global moments of death and dying and awareness each of us experienced personally while working within systems that were operating, quote unquote, as usual, made it increasingly difficult to maintain one's own sense of well-being while simultaneously endeavoring both to support the well-being of one's students and colleagues and to transform or alchemize institutional inequities. Numerous scholars have noted the stress that faculty and staff were under during those times and remain under during this time. The book asks this question: how might we address these challenges in order to protect employee well-being and retain those individuals who are committed to creating a more humane and inclusive higher education? And ultimately, what we're really asking is, how do we serve and model for our students what it might mean and look to show up whole, to be courageous, and to enter into the world healed? The volume is meant to serve as a potent means of navigating the turbulence of our time, the slowness of social change and the unending pursuit of liberatory decolonization and the daunting demands on mind, body, and spirit, of finding and coming home to self and becoming whole. More importantly, they provide relief to our overwrought nervous system, contemplative practices do, and help us to transform trauma into fuel for systemic figuration. As individuals across higher education seek ways to deal with external pressures that are forcing institutional change, these stories, we hope, and the practices that they contain invite us to engage and re-engage with the transformative potential of contemplative practice in intentional ways. To, in the words of Octavia Butler, to shape change and to catalyze transformation. Needless to say, this volume is a work of a labor of love justice. The people in the volume share very heartfully a range of practices. They share themselves. They share how they are fragmented, how they are broken within systems where they are trying to get whole. And the systems themselves are broken. Their narratives, the stories of the volume contributors, help us to imagine new ways of being at home with ourselves within these institutions and systems. Their works recount what we have learned to forget and assist us in guiding readers in the pursuit of the recognition of the fullness of their humanity and remember themselves to wholeness within institutions that lack the ability to love and care for us in our humanness. As we write the introduction, Alexis Pauline Gumbs wrote in a 2012 article, she says, quote, "The university was not created to save my life. The university is not about the preservation of a bright brown body," or a big one in this case. "The university will use me alive and use me dead. The university does not intend to love me. The university does not know how to love me. The university, in fact, does not love me, but the universe does. Those words resonate with me more deeply than you could know. They also surface a critical question. Why do we hold the expectation that the university, or any systems of domination for that matter, will love us, will save our lives, or even care about the quality of one's life over the institution or the system's need for production and outputs and survival? Indeed, from a systems perspective, higher education was not created to save our lives. Perhaps we were created to save ourselves and one another, to shape our students, and to alter our beingness. It could be that higher education was created to bring us, we kindreds of spirit, who need to find one another, into collective, energetic communion, to create roadmaps to home and to community. That's what CTP did for me while I was here. So I've just told you all the bad things about higher education, right, and systems. And so you might be asking, well, why would you situate this in higher education? We put this work there primarily because we believe and hope that all is not lost. Because this is where we have decided to do our labor in service to our work. Say that again. This is where we have decided to do our labor in service to our work. And because we know that it's within the halls of institutions like this one, where we sit in today, that shape the future leaders of tomorrow. That shape the future leaders of tomorrow. Again, it's no doubt higher ed is in a fragile state. And its future contested as the human collective undergoes a political, social, and ontological turn. Add to all of that, attacks on higher ed from the highest office in the land, combined with language restrictions, words that we can and cannot say, concepts that we are restricted from teaching and thinking through, policing of thoughts and restrictions of funding, and we find ourselves personally and professionally in a type of unimaginable hellscape. A hellscape that curriculum and political theorists have been warning us about for decades. For decades. However, as I write in the first book, Ubuntu and Buddhism in Higher Education, my dissertation turned research monograph, we have the ability to reimagine a new way in higher education and in the country. A university, I write, has being. A university has possibilities, and they are infinite. It has multiple options. Each university could be other than what it is. It is the possibilities of this other thanness of higher education that begs us to question what it might become. A university, like a nation, is a choice. Is a choice. And we have some choices to make. In Ubuntu and Buddhism, and in this volume of Contemplative Practices and Acts of Resistance, both are calling for an ontological revolution. We know that when the beingness of beings is transformed, so too must the institutions and systems they inhabit. Or at the very least, that's the hope. Education, even while under attack, remains a site of possibility for the students it educates and the society it influences. I and the editors and the contributors see contemplative practices, which are those ways of coming home to ourselves and finding home within communities, as acts of resistance, as one of those hopes and methods of ontological revolution. So I want to discuss with you now contemplative practice as method. It is a method of resistance a way of being, doing, knowing, and forming your values for how you will be, do, know, and come to know the world. I want to discuss with you the necessity of coming home to self. And finally, I want to chat with you today about how contemplative practice is combined with my first academic love, the philosophy-praxis of Ubuntu, might allow us to come and find home in community and help us to rethink the system we call higher education. Contemplative practice is a method. Contemplative practices are acts of resistance that sustain us, that wrest us away, however fleetingly, from the fast-paced, demanding, dehumanizing nature of the world. It allows us to be free. It allows us to be human, to be filled, to be at peace, to be joyful. But it is not a magic fix. We want to state that plainly, that the transformative power of contemplative practice requires ongoing, lifelong applications of intention, awareness, commitment, introspection, understanding, stillness, surrender, and conscious action. The process of transformation is arduous, yet unlike the university, it just might save your life. Contemplative practice is a method. We curriculum theorists, understand method to be an ontological decision always. Ontology, how we be in the world, shapes our epistemological pursuits and informs our axiological commitments. There's going to be a quiz on that later. Chapter 4 of Ubuntu and Buddhism in Higher Education is all about method as an ontological decision. So much so, I felt it necessary to create my own non-method. Right? The whole chapter is called Rethinking as Non-Method. In it, I say it's a rendezvous with both philosophy and disciplinary knowledge that leads us to rethinking ontological, epistemological, and ethical notions. Essentially, it's an attempt at undoing, transgressing, subverting, and resisting the epistemological and methodological violence inflicted on beings, on human beings. It's a resistance to the creativity-killing assimilationist machines that we call American schooling. It's a decolonizing response to academic colonization to which we have all been subjected. Like rethinking as non-method, contemplative practice, as I have come to understand it, is an ontocognitive process by which we place who we be, who we hope to be, our past and present experiences, intention, and intertwine them with the visible and invisible benevolent energy of a loving and evolving universe toward concentrated awareness. Contemplative practice is method, is a method for experiencing, learning, and unlearning ourselves and the world. In Deleuzian terms, it's a cosmic cartography laid over the human spirit, laid over the human experience. It's a map and not a tracing. We understand contemplative practices as thresholds of embodied understanding and universal connectivity that allow us to cultivate necessary awareness and self-reflection for our interactions with others. These practices, we hope, will manifest compassion, care, and healing toward ourselves and in our professional relationships with students and colleagues. At one point in my career, I told you I've had many jobs, I served as the executive director, the final executive director, in service to the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, CMIND. It was there I began to delve deeper into contemplative practices. CMIND created this tree of contemplative practice. The actual practices they identified fall along the branches of stillness, ritual, generative movement, creativity, relational, and activist. They're meant to bring us into heightened awareness, learning and unlearning, and deeper communion and connection. As I see it, contemplative practice is an onto epistemology, a chosen way of being, knowing, and doing in the world. I first came to know and practice contemplative methodologies here at LSU. I realized very quickly as I was working on my dissertation that I could not get out of my mind. It just kept racing, kept running. I go to bed thinking about the dissertation topic. I wake up thinking about the dissertation topic. I go to bed thinking about how I didn't have a dissertation topic. I wake up thinking about what the hell am I going to do because I don't have a dissertation topic. And I realized I needed a way to come back to myself, to get out of my body, to get out of my head and drop back down into my body. Right? The academy values our minds over our bodies. And so we're always up here. So what did I do? The first thing I did was one summer, I took a Tai Chi course. Boy, was that interesting. And all the movement and the hold the ball. It's like, I don't see a ball. Don't see a ball. Give me a ball to hold, right? The next summer, I took a golf course, which was more my speed. Right? It was really great. Then I realized I still can't get out of my mind. So I signed up for an art therapy course. And that helped. And I have all these splattered paintings. You don't want to see them, but they were very helpful to me to get the energy out of my body. And then I began to read and study Thich Nhat Hanh's socially engaged Buddhism. Right? I could not sit a pillow to save my life. I still really can't sit a pillow to save my life, to meditate. But what I realized was that anything you give concentrated attention to is meditation. And study is meditation. This also began my long affair with socially engaged Buddhism. Right? So much so that it became a part of the philosophical practices through which I thought with, read through, theorized with for my dissertation topic. Method. How we come to know what we know. Pinar's Carrere. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot's portraiture. Molly Quinn's Peace and Pedagogy. Toni Morrison's elimination of the white gaze. Kevin Quashie's centering of black aliveness rather than black death. Methods. All of these are methods. Beauty, asserts Christina Sharp, is a method as well. Let's find that beauty slide. Bear with me, folks. There we go. Beauty is a method too. Quoting Saidiya Hartman, Sharp in her 2023 book, Ordinary Notes, writes, "Beauty is not a luxury. Rather, it is a way of creating possibility in the space of enclosure, a radical act of subsistence, an embrace of our terribleness, a transfiguration of the given. It is a will to adorn, a proclivity for the Baroque, and the love of too much." So too are contemplative practices, a way of creating possibility in the space of enclosure, a way to be ye transformed by the renewing of your hearts and minds through the concentrated cultivation of inner awareness to alter outer form. It is through contemplative practices that we come to understand being as practice. Again, we write in the volume, challenging notion of sitting one's pillow. I told you I can't do that. Or chanting ancient mantras. Contemplative practices can be understood not only as the formal skills developed through gurus, certified courses, or training programs, but also as the potent, rich moments and encounters from your own cultural or familial context. As one of our contributors shared, early experiences like the repetitive meditation of cooking with family members, or the potent cultivation of inner awareness. Contemplative practices are living engagements. Let me get myself back on track here. Are living engagements and evolving understandings of what it might mean to be at home, to be human, to be interconnected, and to be whole. Unscripted, unrehearsed, these inherent practices can also be messy, organic, and true. These are the practice gems that help cultivate our inner vulnerability and courage. Necessary tools as we work to ease suffering and assist the Academy in living up to its professed ideals. One of the conversations I had with the contributors, this contributor especially, Brandon Hutchison, who writes the first chapter of part 1, Brandon's at Southern Connecticut. We chatted, she said, I don't know anything about contemplative practice. So what were practices for you? And I said, well, on Saturdays, if you grew up in the South at least, and you have a front porch, somebody's gonna be on the front porch picking greens. Picking greens on the front porch on a Saturday with your elders is a contemplative practice. It's a way of coming home to self. Right? It's a way of being together in community. Right? I grew up in Texas. Right? Christmas, a couple days before Christmas, everybody gathers to make tamales. A chaotic contemplative practice, but it is one. It's a way of being in community. It's concentrated action. Right? We all have these practices that are cultural, that are innate to us. You don't have to sit a pillow. You don't have to go to some far-off place. Right? Study is a contemplative practice. Our sincerest hope in this volume, we write, is that you delve into what is authentic to your own experience with contemplative practices and inner approaches. As you be, do, know with the practices contained in this volume, we encourage you to consider what is the body of wisdom and experience from which you draw that revives and grounds you? What are the teachings and ways of being that enable you to challenge power imbalances, dehumanization, and ecological degradation? It is from those wells of wisdom and storehouses of power you will need to draw from and to return to again and again, to do the critical work needed in this moment and in each moment. Following Christina Sharp, I'll ask you to consider these questions. What might contemplative practices as methods break open, rupture, make possible and impossible? What might it make irresistible? How might it birth new love? That is to say, how might it compel and propel us toward resistance and revolution? For all revolutions are grounded in love. How might contemplative practices allow us to carry its knowledge with us and make new worlds? That's right. Contemplative practice reminds us that everything, change, transformation, resistance, and revolution, are all inside jobs first. They're all inside jobs first. When our understanding of ourselves, of human beings, change, then our understanding of what systems and institutions are must transform as well. And so too, what and how those institutions operate in the world. It is in this way that contemplative practice is a sustained and transformative act of resistance, which should be placed alongside other forms of resistance to help humanity rise to its highest calling and its better nature. Contemplative practice is method, and as a method of resistance, provides concentrated impact when carried out in a collective manner, moving with intention in the same direction. A contemplative community in search of liberation is the ultimate form of resistance. I often make the distinction between liberation and freedom. Freedom is a political designation that must be won and re-won in every generation. It does not stay won. We're seeing it now. The very freedoms that we thought were bedrock are being stripped away from us. While liberation, on the other hand, is a state of being that can be sustained. It's an inside job. It is the critical aim of this volume and of my work, liberation. I once asked my grandmother, who is of blessed memory, to define liberation for me. And the only way my grandmother could. Let me think on that for a moment. Oh hell, this is going to be quite an answer. And she said, liberation is freeing your mind and untethering your soul so that your ass can follow. Freeing your mind and untethering your soul so that your ass can follow. And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the definition. That is the definition. Thank you, Graham. We are reminded by ancestor Audre Lorde, liberation can never be achieved alone. Can never be achieved alone, but always in community and inextricably linked to love, which is always transformation labor. To say this another way, concentrated collective action moving in the same direction within a shared reality is the basis of liberation and freedom from oppression. This type of community requires an understanding that we are human together, that we have shared values, that we have a radical openness, that we practice belonging, and that we love, and that we understand that love is a way of being. It's an active practice, and it's a political tool. This brings me to my first love, Ubuntu. Ubuntu, I am because we are. African scholar Michael Eze says that Ubuntu, in his definition, or understanding, interpretation of a definition, is that a person is a person through other people. You are not born human, but made human in relationship with others. He says humanity is a quality we owe each other. We create each other and need to sustain this otherness creation. And if we belong to each other, we participate in our creations. We are because you are, and since you are, definitely I am. Ubuntu. Ubuntu as a philosophy praxis, which is a philosophy in action. Or as we would say in our work in curriculum theorizing, is an onto-epistemology, which has the potential to engender and cultivate harmony, respect, and compassion, not only for other human beings, but all sentient beings. Much like my definition of contemplative practices, theologian D.J. Lowe defines praxis as more than practice, but as, quote, the intention of actions as related to meaning and destiny. Intention, concentration, action, movement. Ubuntu for me is one such philosophy and way of being in the world that I utilize, right? To rethink, to reimagine the very socio-political, cultural issues of the world. And it propels us toward the creation of a, quote, new awareness of purpose and meaning in life. It's a positive, ethical, or moral way of being, of going in the world and in relation, and being in relation to others. It is the concept in and through which I contemplate what does it mean to be a human being? What does this definition of human beingness make possible? What does it make impossible? What does it make thinkable and unthinkable? What does it have the ability to make real or unreal? What does it mean to be a human being? How does this understanding inform how we might build and be community together? And how might we reimagine, again going back to higher ed, as a place, space, and a process through which we come to understand the need to be in right relationship with one another and our ecological kin, with all that is seen and unseen, How do we come to understand this place and the act of education, this act of leading us away then back to ourselves differently? How might it deepen our understanding of our shared humanity? What I assert, or I'm trying to assert, in much of this work and much of my other work, and especially in my work on Ubuntu, Buddhism, and contemplative practices, is that we do not need any new set of uncontestable truths, but rather we need more generous ontologies, more generous onto-epistemologies that require us to actively engage in and with the reality of living in this universe, on this planet, at this time, in this moment, with these people, under this set of ever-changing conditions, with the ability to ebb, flow, bend, but not break. To be under attack, but remain whole. Living, dynamic, fluid, in motion and in relationship, active, reemotic, and grounded in love. That's what this moment calls for. In higher education, I offer this might be done by rethinking the subject. And second, by reimagining how we do what we do in our hallowed halls. If you ever pick up Ubuntu and Buddhism, every chapter should be a book. I went back and read it this past week in preparation for this talk, and I thought, what the hell was I thinking? when I wrote this, but every chapter can probably be stretched out into a book. There's one chapter where we reconceptualize Western subjectivity altogether, right? Which I think we need to do, by the way. In what I developed as an onto-educational philosophy of higher education, thinking with and through Ubuntu and Buddhism, I attempted to imagine a possible set of fluid solutions. Very quickly, my Ubuntu and Buddhist-hued onto-educational philosophy contains 5 tenets. I'm going to run through them really quick. The first is, instead of students and teachers, we become a community of learners. A community of learners, and rather a community of unlearners. Right? What we learn about mindfulness is actually about unlearning rather than learning. A community of learners deeply engaged in the practice of coming home to self and building community through the formation of educated persons. That is to say, in the African sense, which is not a person who is held captive by the discipline of Western schooling, but rather a person who is wise and who can engage in dialogue, a person who is moral and who has the ability to reason. Like liberation, learning is a communal unfolding, and in even more, it is an unlearning. My grandmother is very present today, would often say about some very learned people, that's the biggest educated fool I've ever met in my life. Right? This isn't about letters behind a name, but it's about wisdom and how you place what you have learned in service to others. The second is the educative environment should be normative or moral. That is to say that the highest moral obligation within the communities of unlearners or learners is to become more human. The goal here is to develop moral maturity, which is a requirement for living in community. An onto-educational philosophy of education seeks to enlarge the learner's moral imagination by, quote, harnessing a culture of humanity and responsibility in schools and contributing toward nurturing a politics of harmony in education. Through this reimagining, higher education becomes a community of mutual care and support. Of mutual care and support. A formative space-time where right action, right livelihood, and right speech can be practiced, and moral maturity cultivated through the learning or unlearning process of trial and error. Communities of care and support. I gave a talk last night, and one of the questions at the end of that talk, which was about Lent, by the way, nothing about what I'm about to tell you it was about, asked, how are you communicating with people this sort of rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I thought, well, I just gave you a whole sermon on whatever it was that's on hope, right, for this Lenten lecture. And you asked me about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe fitting, maybe not appropriate, I don't know. But this was my answer to them. That diversity, equity, and inclusion, in essence, is about creating communities of care and support, where everyone can thrive according to their own definition of thriving, where they can flourish. If there are folks who tell me they don't want to create communities of care and support, those are not my people. Those are not my people. And we vote with our dollars, we vote with our feet, we vote with our butts and seats. It's not your place, right? But it's about building communities of care and support. Our learning in the third is that our learning and unlearning together is dialogical and reflexive. In an onto-educational philosophy of higher education, the community of learners engages in dialogue and practices reflexivity. As Dr. Petra Hendry would often remind us when I was here, language speaks us. Language speaks us. Therefore, it is through dialogue that we come to know and are known. It's how we come to understand. Dialogue. The fourth is through the employment of an onto-educational philosophy of education. Higher education is democratic. Democratic in the African perspective, meaning that we come to live, be, and make decisions together by consensus. It's through the practice of consensus building and dialogue that learners make space for the existence of a myriad of ideas and perspectives, without holding any one of those uncompromisingly, insofar as the ideas meet the needs of the community. The ideas are ethical and recognize the dignity of each human being. The final tenet of this onto-educational philosophy is that it's humanizing. It's humanizing. Higher education, the community of unlearners seeks to impart an understanding of the complexity of the world and of human history and humanity through the exploration of knowledges. After all, knowledge is the challenge of being human, so as to discover the promise of being human together. As Bell Hooks reminded us in teaching Community, a Pedagogy of Hope, to build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. Education must be humanizing. So you're looking at me thinking, well, what the hell does that all mean? It means that institutions of higher education have an obligation to expand the mind, to enhance moral growth, to problematize and make question, to promote ontological, epistemological, and axiological development. The seed of these developmental processes must be firmly planted at the site of the human being first. First. It means that education at all levels is always a practice of freedom, pointing us toward liberation. It means that liberation grounded in community and love is always a transformative battle. Love humanizes. It accepts the other in their otherness, but also demands equal dignity, respect, mutual care, challenge and support, tolerance, and openness be extended to all human beings. Yes, even those we don't like, especially to those we don't like. It means that, like contemplative practice, education is a process of being and becoming more human and in right relationship. Beyond protests and other forms of civil disobedience, these ways of being maintain a type of wholeness, a type of wholeness that might be the ultimate form of resistance. That is, when everything around you is coercing, commanding, forcing, crumbling, and necessitating that you be otherwise. Contemplative practice, finding home within self, finding home in community, might be the ultimate resistance. I'm going to ask you to participate in a practice with me, a ritual for resisting. Then I'm going to sit down. So we have called forth transformation. Transformation is an unpredictable undertaking. We have asked you to resist. Resistance looks, feels, and is different for each human being. We've asked you to commit to carrying it forward together. Liberation, a fruit of resistance, is a collective undertaking. The path to transformation is expansive, always. We summon joy. Joy, too, is a method. Joy, too, is a method. So I'll ask you to find a comfortable posture in your chairs. Relax your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. Let your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth. You're here. Breathe. Take the deepest breath you've taken all day. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. You are here. Inhale. Exhale. We are here. Inhale. Exhale. We are here. Listen to these words. Let it flow. Grasp nothing. What are you resisting? And it's touching your salvation. Feel the ache of liberation. Soften into the nourishing embrace of love. Wipe tears. Unclench jaw. Loosen fists. Release sound. Breathe. Smile into joy. Laugh in hope. Where does it feel free? Convene with yourselves in the free place. Free zones are the nascent spaces of liberation. Breathe. Imagine. Imagine community. Imagine freedom. Imagine new futures. What images are painted on the canvas of your mind? Breathe. Sit in gratitude. Breathe. Breathe in the manifestation of your resistance. Hum. Om. Rise. Be what is not yet that you have called forth. Smile at the itch of your nose. Take joy in the twinkle of your toes. You are here. You are here. You are here. Deep breath, come back to us. Thank you. My hope is that some of that made sense. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Comments, concerns?